So I want to take some time to talk about the upcoming Acolyte finale, as we are now 7 episodes deep, and I have to admit I am a little bit worried. Now, what concerns me the most at the moment is the fact that we have one episode, and if rumours are to be believed, the runtime is going to be very similar to episode 7, which all in is about 42 to 43 minutes, and when you discount the credits and the intro and the recap, it's probably going to be between 30 to 35 minutes of actual episode content. And no matter what way you cut it, that is just not enough to round off a story that has been told over the last 7 episodes, and my biggest complaint about this show has been that the structure and the pacing has been all off. It's all over the place. It is a messy show. I've enjoyed the core premise. I've enjoyed the mystery. At least I enjoyed it up until episode 7. I've enjoyed certain characters, Chimera, Soul. I will admit I'm not the twins' biggest fan, and that is for many, many reasons. The fact that their motivations are a bit confused. The acting isn't brilliant. The dialogue is messy. But by all means, I don't necessarily hate them. I just kind of wish that this show had been one or the other. It either focused completely on the twins, or it focused on Chimera's desire for an apprentice, or it focused on Soul and the Jedi and their cover-up. It's tried to do all three at once in a showtime that is really not long enough to cover all of those aspects in great detail, to get you invested, especially when you consider that this is a brand new era to live action. We don't know any of the characters outside of Venestra, and that's only if you've read the novels, and even then, she's not a major character in the books. So that's where this show has suffered, and there are elements of it now that, looking back, I always try and wait until the show is finished before making a big judgment, and I will be doing, a retrospective breakdown of each episode when I do my review after the finale, because again, we won't know the full picture until the finale, but we've gotten a good idea as to the overall content of the show, and the big mystery has been revealed. And as I say, outside of the disappointment of that mystery, which I'll jump into in a little bit, for me, it's been a bit messy. There are scenes that have fell out of place. We've cut from one character to another because we've not had enough time to spend with individual characters. Motivations seem to change on a whim and without real, clear explanation. If we know the history of a character, we might know why they suddenly decide to change their mind or act on something that they seemingly wouldn't normally act on. The way that they're trying to do it with Soul, where they are giving us this kind of look back at, what happened on Brendok and how Soul was involved in that. In principle, that's a really good way to try and tell a story. The way that they've tried to structure those flashback episodes, in principle, can work really well. If you look at, for example, the Knives Out series of films, the Benoit Blanc kind of detective story, it can work really well where you show the events happening from one perspective to begin with. You spend the majority of the runtime figuring out who could have done it, what actually happened, and then you go and revisit those events with the full perspective, and you see things that you missed out on or that you didn't realise had happened through other people's perspectives. That's what they tried to do in episode 7, and that's what they've been trying to do throughout this season. However, the execution has been very, very poor. It's been a very, very messy version of that, and that's because they've simply tried to cram too much in too soon, and it feels like in certain areas they've not known how to exactly display events to make them exciting, and the editing really hasn't been tight enough for us to keep the interest up all the way through. So, for example, as I mentioned, this story, when it was first announced, to me, I felt like this was going to be a big show in the way that it was going to follow the dark side, it was going to follow a Sith or a Sith apprentice, and as time has gone on and we've seen more of the plot, it's very clear that was never really the original concept. It might have been what Lucasfilm wanted from the get-go, but as the show has kind of taken shape and it's been written in a certain way, it's actually been a bit grayer than that. There is a Sith involved. There is what you could possibly call an apprentice involved, but I don't think May is neither one nor the other. She's not an apprentice. She's not outright bad. She's not outright good. She's a mystery but not one that I'm particularly interested in unraveling, because there's so much going on. We've got too many things to try and take in and not enough time for it to really settle and build. And that brings me down to the concern about episode 8. If we do only have 30 to 35 minutes, there is still so much that we need to cover. We have the aftermath of the realizations from both May and Osha as to what actually happened on Brendock, and their respective confrontations with Soul and Chimera. Whatever it is that comes from that, whether Osha decides to turn to the dark side, whether May decides to, confront Soul in a physical way after what he did, back on Brendock, you then have the scene in the trailer where it's the only thing that we haven't seen so far. It's the chase through the planet rings with both the Jedi ship and May's ship. So they have to leave the planet that they're on for Osha and Chimera. They have to somehow find each other, go on this chase. It looks like May's ship is going to crash down onto the planet, and then we might get an eventual showdown on Brendock. I think that's where they end up seeing what I've seen from the trailers. I think that's where they crash. So we've got all that to take in. We have to cover off whatever has happened with Venestra. Just this week, she has been shown in a new costume, which is a High Senate costume, and it looks great. Don't get me wrong. Once again, the costuming department has done a really good job with it. However, she also has her part to play. She's not been able to find Soul and, Osha and May. We know that she's likely involved in this cover-up, but how? We still don't know. How is she going to, pass off the idea that all of these Jedi have died, looking for Kalnaka? She's going to have to try and portray, not just to the High Council, but now it seems like maybe the Senate, a twisted event of what happened. So that's going to take up a certain chunk of time. We have to have potentially a scene with Osha and May where either they reconcile, one of them dies. There has to be some kind of conclusion there, because Leslie Headland has said that this story will conclude itself by the end of the season. Then we have to decide what's going to happen with Chimera. Are we going to get a reveal on his master? So there is so much to cram into one small episode, and I am very, very worried, based off what I've seen, that they're not going to be able to pull it off in a rewarding way. And again, don't get me wrong, I think that if this was to be structured correctly, it could give us a satisfactory end. Again, I've said this show is great in premise, mediocre overall, and it's been terrible in execution. There's been some elements that have been great, some elements that have been really, really terrible. And I'm kind of one of those that firstly has wanted to wait until the show actually finished before giving a final judgment. And is not afraid of both praising and criticizing the show where I think it deserves it. I said the first sort of 5 episodes, I was really engaged, really enjoying it. Episode 7 for me was where things started to really fall apart, because it felt like a waste of an episode. It felt like things did not need to be as detailed as they were. We didn't need to see certain things over and over and over again. And again, I am just not engaged with the twins and their story and this, convergence and whatever they might be, because my attention has been focused elsewhere. There are other things that are more interesting than the twins in this show, because there's too many stories going on. There's not one singular focus with little bits on the side. That's how a story like this should be. You should definitely have side courses that you can kind of dig into whilst the main quest is going on, but that main quest should be the main focus. And it just feels like between Osha, May, Soul, the flashbacks, the Coven, Chimera, there is too much too soon, and it is potentially ruined the show. And again, I think this is kind of a good example of maybe an inexperienced showrunner, someone who has good ideas in principle, knows the story that they want to tell, but just does not know how to convert that into a format that, again, I feel is never sufficient for streaming. Disney and other companies seem to take on this idea that 8 episodes between 30 to 40 minutes in length is sufficient to tell a story that realistically is a movie stretched out. It needs to be one or the other. It needs to be either a compressed, condensed movie, 2.5 hours, or it needs to be a fully fledged season of television. And if that's going to be episodic, or not. It needs to have consistency. The Mandalorian was great because, for the most part, it was episodic. And you didn't need to necessarily see every single episode to get a gist of what was going on. You know, the very beginning sets up the story. You then have 4 or 5 episodes where you have, you know, the Mandalorian going on all these different little adventures, building up the relationship between him and Grogu, you know, getting little extra tidbits of information, but the focus is solely on the Mandalorian. And then the last 2 episodes kind of bring you back into that main focus of the Empire coming for Grogu, and you have that rewarding, satisfying ending, because that's what a story really should be. You don't need every episode to serve the story directly. You know, you can have filler, you can have episodes that are side quests that serve to build the world and build characters. You know, and that's the way a show should be, especially one where it's the first season and you're getting introduced to these characters for the first time. So I feel like a mixture of the restrictions put in place, whether it's by Disney or producers or Lucasfilm, whoever it is, on the runtime and the structure of the show, with an inexperienced showrunner, has really strangled the quality of the Acolyte so far. And I would love nothing more than to be able to say at the end of the finale, that was a great send-off, it was a really good finish, and it helped to patch up whatever troubles there might have been through the story. But I get the feeling that, firstly, when we do get this finale, it will be underwhelming, it will feel rushed, and I'll be sat there at the end not feeling quite satisfied. I will also say that I think that it will probably be a better rewatch if you can watch episodes 1 to 8 all the way through without disruption, because it will feel a little bit more tied together rather than having these constant interruptions and these breaks and these cliffhangers that aren't quite cliffhangers or don't have rewarding payoffs at the beginning of the next episode. It will probably feel better if you can watch it binged, you know, and I'm not an advocate for binging you know, shows when they first come out, you know, dropping every episode all at once. I don't think it works for the most part. The Netflix model, as some people call it, very rarely pays off. I like the idea of dropping them week to week, having rewarding cliffhangers that you can talk about through the week, you can speculate on, but if it ends every week with a cliffhanger that doesn't pay off, it kind of loses its momentum, it loses its purpose. And if, you know, you're sat there thinking, well, that was a bit rushed and I don't feel fulfilled or rewarded because I didn't feel like I got enough, it also kind of takes away from the experience. So it's kind of the mantra of the show so far. It's had some really good elements. I've enjoyed certainly the earlier part of the season, and especially episode 5. Some of the elements of it have been fantastic. The action has been top-notch. The choreography, top-notch. Costume design, top-notch. You know, some of the acting has been top-notch. Some of it, not really. The dialogue has been very clunky. I'd say as well, the show feels like it's trying to be philosophical, but it's not. It comes across as pretentious. It's trying to have these great whimsical moments, like the speech in Andor, you know, by Stellan Skarsgård's character, and it just doesn't come off the same because you don't buy into it, whether it's because it's the acting or the way the dialogue is worded, or the positioning of it, you know, the pacing of the episode that it leads up to. All these things have to be taken into consideration, and if one of them is out, it can ruin the whole thing. So there's been some really great elements, and then sort of episode 6 and 7, it's really started to slip, and those earlier issues of pacing and structure really start to, you know, bring through the problems and starts to really cause long-term damage. So I'm hoping that episode 8 can pull it off. I know a lot of you, especially if you're coming from that side of the fandom that, you know, has not liked this show from the get-go, you're going to be saying, no, it's going to be terrible, it's going to be awful, the worst thing that's ever happened. I don't think this show's been awful. I think it's been mediocre. I think it honestly has started off strong, some good ideas, but its execution has really let it down. And ultimately, it's just another all-right Star Wars show that hopefully is the beginning of better things to come. I'm hoping that Skeleton Crew can improve things. You know, they've already got the acting chops for it with Jude Law. I'm always a bit hesitant when you base your story around children because, as we know, children in any story can be hit or miss. The premise of the show seems fairly interesting, but again, it's going to be the execution So fingers crossed, that's going to be good. We'll just have to wait and see. Like I say, I'll have a comprehensive review of the Acolyte as a whole once the finale is dropped this week coming up. In the meantime, I'd love to know, what are your thoughts so far on the show? You know, please be genuine. Don't just say it's the best thing ever or it's the worst thing ever because that's just how you feel you have to say it. Please be honest. Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you for the finale.